This podcast features the diverse perspective of a thriving global community of coaches, leaders, and experts sharing their captivating stories, journeys, expert advice, and more.
Hello, and welcome to Coaches Connect podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Jones, and today we have a very exciting guest. Yannick Jacob is a coach, supervisor, trainer, and mediator with master degrees in both existential coaching and applied positive psychology. His love for coaching, practical philosophy, and personal development is quite contagious, and he loves to challenge his clients to think, learn, and grow, to explore the big questions, and to appreciate the whole spectrum of what life and work have to offer. Yannick is part of the teaching faculties at Anima Center for Coaching, the International Center for Coaching Supervision, and the School of Life, and he presents at conferences internationally. Yannick's also the course director of the accredited certificate in integrative coaching at the School of Positive Transformation, for which he's gathered many of the world's most influential coaches, and he was the program leader of the Master of Science Coaching Psychology at the University of East London. This year, Yannick became the new host of the popular Coaching Uncaged podcast, and his book, An Introduction to Existential Coaching, was published by Routledge in 2019. He's also the host of Yannick's Coaching Lab, where every first Tuesday of the month, he gives coaches the opportunity to be a fly on the wall for a full-length coaching session with an experienced pro, followed by conversations and practice breakouts. You can learn more about Yannick and his work at www.existential.coach and rocketsupervision.com. Let's now welcome Yannick Jacob. Good afternoon. How are you?
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you very much. You've got such a lovely, friendly vibe. I can't wait to talk to you.
Thank you so
we've
much.
got
Yeah.
we've got a new name for the podcast. I just realized.
What is it?
It's now called the Coaches Studio. Just because at Animas there's a business platform for the coaches that's called Coaches Uncaged. So after 11 seasons of Coaching Uncaged, we decided to, with a new host, give it a new twist, give it a new name, and it's now the Coaches Studio. And it's fascinating journey for me because with the oomph of a bigger institution in the back, I can just tell Joan, thank you so much, you're amazing. Hey, I want to talk to Peter Hawkins, and she just makes it happen.
That's awesome. So now it's called the Coaches Studio.
That's right.
Okay. Well, we'll be on the lookout for the new name. So excited to be here with you. I have obviously so many questions that are just like going on around in my head. I want to just get right into it. I was so intrigued by watching videos about you, reading a little bit about existential coaching, but I would really like for you to just educate us and let us understand, what does it mean, first of all, when you start talking about, someone that's going to meet with you and say, oh, I'm an existential coach. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, that's a big question in itself, right? Because if you talk to 10 existential coaches, difficult to find 10 coaches who would say, I'm an existential coach.
Yes.
But they're out there. And if you ask 10, then you probably get 10 different answers. What they all have in common is that it's a coaching approach that's grounded in existential philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And existential philosophy is a philosophy around big questions in life. Mainly around what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to exist? What is existence? What is human experience? What is the experience of being in the world, human, with other human beings? All these inner conflicts, these dilemmas, these anxieties that we carry around simply as a result of being alive and in the world with others, right? So that's we're meaning-making machines in a world where we don't know what the meaning of life is, but we're making sense of everything all the time. We can't help it, but also it's paradox, right?
Yeah.
We're looking to belong. We're social animals, but essentially nobody can really get what it's like to be me. Nobody can understand my experience of me being Yannick. I will never understand what it's like to be Nicole. It's just impossible. No matter how many songs you write, no matter how many stories you tell, no matter how long we are in conversation or how long, you might be married to a partner. You think you can read somebody's mind sometimes, but really you have no idea what it's like to be them. right?
I love that part. I just want to take a little pause there because
Sure.
this is one of my pet peeves when someone says, "Oh, I know exactly what you think, what you're
Oh no.
feeling." And I get so like, "Oh,
Yeah.
no, you don't know. You're not me. You don't know what I'm feeling right now. You may have gone through a similar feeling, but
Yeah.
your feeling is still not my feeling."
Yeah. I can
And
resonate with your feeling,
yes,
right?
yes, you can resonate with the feeling. But that's something that I always, as a young child, have always challenged someone to say, well, how do you know how I feel? Oh, well, I've gone through the same thing. And it's led all the way to adulthood where I
Yeah.
still have that feeling from childhood that's like, you really
You don't
don't
know
know
me,
who I am.
mom.
Yeah.
You have no idea what it's like to be me. But that's why, many teenagers, they have a very existential period where they ask themselves these big questions around
Yeah.
what is it like to be me, and how much time do I have left, like, in this world, is something that people maybe ask later in life. But like
Yeah.
this not being understood, this existential isolation, this loneliness that can sometimes come with being
Mm.
human.
Mhm.
This not feeling understood, this
Mhm.
looking for our tribes, looking for meaning, looking for purpose. What am I going to do with my life? I have
Mhm.
to make all of these decisions. And I have this, especially now in the age of the internet, this incredible awareness of what kind of lives are possible for me. You
Mhm.
know, what's out there, all these people documenting their lives on Instagram and Facebook, usually a very polished version, but sometimes
Of
also just
course.
very real.
Right.
So you
Right.
have this understanding very early in life that all of these things are possible, and there's a generation of millennials that were raised with an attitude of you can be anything you like, you know and then we need to make decisions on what we're going to do when school ends, and what are we going to study, or are we going to do an apprenticeship, or are we going to do a startup as an entrepreneur because this and that guy dropped out of school when they were 13 and now they're a billionaire. So
I could do
it's
that too.
yeah. So that existential awareness, existential coaches are quite aware of the relationship between freedom and responsibility, right?
Freedom
y-
and responsibility.
my
Wow.
clients can make any decision that they want as long as they carry the responsibility for the consequences that these actions carry. And usually people want the freedom, but they don't
But
want to
not the
carry the
responsibility.
responsibility. But they're two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other.
And you make a good point there. You can't have one without the other. But do you believe many people feel they can?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They like to tell
Yeah.
themselves the story that they can, and then they
Yeah.
run into all sorts of issues. After which, maybe they end up in a coaching room and they say, "Why do my relationships don't work out? Or why did the job didn't not work out? Why do I struggle so much? Or why is this so difficult?"
Yeah.
And then maybe with that kind of existential awareness, we can feed some of these themes back. It's like, as an existential coach, what I'm always listening out for is, what is my client's relationship with meaninglessness or absurdity, with
Hmm.
making choices, with responsibility, with authenticity, with
Hmm.
endings, death being perhaps the ultimate ending. We don't know what's
Right.
going to come after, or if there's
Right.
anything, but
Right.
like, things end all the time. What's my relationship with that kind of existential isolation, and that, not the impossibility of being understood? And when you grasp some of your clients' relationships with these existential themes,
Hmm.
they tend to be related to a lot of what the clients bring into the coaching room, as in, I want to get to the next career level, or I want to figure out this relationship. Often, in my experience, all the time, there's
Hmm.
existential themes underneath. The big questions are underneath the presenting issue. And if we
Yeah.
open those doors, we might be able to answer, or to help somebody answer, a lot of these questions that seem tangible, that seem almost mundane sometimes. Um,
Yeah. And you said the big questions. I mean, that's what I loved when I was reading your bio. You know, people don't, this is an assumption. Okay. I'm going to reach a little bit. um, People don't like asking themselves the big questions. They like asking it of
mm,
others. But I believe as, you know, people, uh, when you ask the big questions, that may mean that you have to get real with yourself.
huh,
And I find the big questions are just ones that we kind of like to dance around
mm,
um, and answer over here, but not right here, right? It's kind of like, well, kind of over here and kind of over here. So when we're talking about big questions, what types of, let's say, maybe themes
Mhm.
or trends are you seeing right now with your clients, especially given where we are in society with pandemic, with
Yeah.
war, with just crazy things that are going on?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I think you're right. I think that's why often in coaching, and many coaches listening to this might recognize this, that a client is kind of dancing around the issue or they're moving in circles. And some of these bigger questions, that we keep knocking on their doors. And then the
Hmm.
client moves on. Maybe we even ask the big questions and the client just doesn't answer, or they,
Hmm.
change the topic.
Hmm.
Um, because they're scary, right? We live in a VUCA world, in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And the answers to those questions are also often uncertain, complex, ambiguous. It's they don't have one answer, even though there's plenty of people out there who say this is the answer to what's the meaning in life.
Right.
Um, Everybody still has to find their own answers. So, what are some of those questions? For example, what do I want to do with my life? Right?
I mean, that's a huge one.
Exactly, that's a huge one. Connected to that often is, well, what am I supposed to do with my life?
Ah.
Is there something or someone or an entity, a god, a universe, maybe just a society or parents? Are there voices out there that I should follow?
Hmm.
What's the
Hmm.
truth? What's
Hmm.
true? Can we really know things? What's the point of being alive in the first place? Is there a point to it? What's my point of being alive? Because we can choose things to be meaningful. If they're meaningful to me, they're meaningful. You can't really argue with that experience. But then how do I make choices that are confident and certain, right? We want to make
Hmm.
certain choices. We want to be certain before we make a choice.
Hmm.
How can we do that if everything is uncertain? If we can't really know what's going to happen with any degree of certainty? We can make things more likely, and people work very hard to create a strategy that's most likely to work, and then
Correct.
make a decision to go ahead with it.
Right.
We create a certain program, a product, and then we do the marketing first, and then how many people do something like that, and when they have enough interest, then they're going to produce the thing. So it's difficult to make confident choices in that way. What else? Why am I so alone in this world? Who's my tribe, for example, is a question I often hear.
That's a big one.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
often don't ask, why
Yeah.
am I so alone in this world? Maybe that's more of a question people would bring to a therapist. But when somebody's asking, well, I want to find my people, I want to feel connected, I want to feel like I belong, and
Hmm.
I haven't felt that in a while, or,
Hmm.
I'm in those disputes, or I'm struggling with my relationships, or maybe I've lost a partner, or I'm looking for love. All of these are questions around belonging and where do
Yeah.
I belong in this world. So that's a huge one that can open the door into so many of the questions that coaches get.
Yeah. So listening to, those big questions, um, and people trying to figure out, how that rest with them
Mm.
internally.
Mhm.
My big question for you is, how did you get here? How
Uh-huh.
did you get to become an existential coach?
Yeah. Oh, that is also a big question. Well, there's another big question that is involved in that I hadn't
Hmm.
mentioned, and it's interesting that I didn't come up immediately. But for me, that was one of the driving questions, right? How can I be happy?
Ah,
So
huge.
for me, the short story is that after school, you kind of need to decide what you're going to do with the rest of your life, and I
Of
come,
course. So apparently we have to, right? Apparently this
yeah,
says that we need to do something like that.
yeah, and my parents are from that generation where you choose a career, and then that's your career for the rest of your life.
Correct.
So with that kind of looming over my head, I wondered what could I do that's not gonna get boring and gonna, what I could be happy doing for the rest of my life. Because I
Mhm.
noticed very early that once I see how a system works, I tend to move on to a different system. Right? That
So
happened.
you figure it out first and then you want to go to the next.
Exactly, that
You don't
happened
kind
in
of stay in the
sports. Did a
system. You
lot of
just
different kind of sports, a lot of different activities,
interesting.
different areas within academic study as well. I always had like lots of very different friends from very different kind of friends groups. So I wanted some diversity and novelty in my life at all times.
Mm.
And I figured, well, people are never going to get boring. They're like, even if you think you figured them out, they tend to just change, and then you don't know what the hell anymore.
So true.
And you can always work with different kinds of people. So
Yeah.
this psychology thing, it gelled well with me. And then initially I wanted to go into psychotherapy and counseling because that's what usually psychology led to.
Right.
And then I fell into positive psychology, the study of what's right with people rather than what's wrong and how we fix it. What is right? What resources can we build on? What strength can we build on? What are all the 0 to +10 things in life that we can focus on? And that was a fantastic way of engaging with academia. There's a brand new science. You could be a bit rebellious, and it was essentially
A
really,
little disruptive.
yeah. And it was also
Yeah.
quite positive, not positive as in we ignore everything that's negative, but positive as in like we look at things that go right. What's right with you is
And
a
that's
question I love to
powerful
ask as a
because,
coach.
yeah,
Mhm.
people don't think about what's right.
Yeah, and
It's very easy to think about what's wrong.
often there's plenty of answers in exploring what's already going well. And I think many coaches do that intuitively. So adding a science to that was fantastic. Then I realized that a lot of positive psychologists actually are a little bit too positive for my taste. And
Wait,
I,
what do you mean by too positive?
I mean by let's not look at the negative. Let's not look at
Oh,
the
so
what makes you
never
anxious.
see that.
Let's
You just
Yeah.
everything is hunky dory, everything's always great. That kind of too
Yeah.
positive?
And that kind of too positive,
Okay.
that has nothing to do with positive psychology, essentially, because it's a science that looks at, was always meant to be integrated in psychology as a whole to complete psychology.
Yeah.
But I felt like I needed an approach to coaching, particularly that acknowledges that life is really, really difficult very often. That we have these anxieties, that we can never get rid of this existential anxiety unless we stop existing or we continuously distract ourselves.
Right.
Life can be quite dark, and it felt incomplete to be a positive psychology coach. So I looked at the other end of
Did
the
you say
spectrum.
it felt incomplete?
Incomplete, yeah. It felt
Wow.
limiting.
Yeah, yeah.
It
Wow.
didn't feel real enough, at least real enough. I mean, I know about the value of positive psychology coaching approaches,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
the people I wanted to work with, I don't like, it didn't gel as well as it could because, often people come in with difficult stories and in difficult times. So yes, exploring your strength can help you through a difficult time, no doubt, but really there's more to life than just that. So in that sense, it felt incomplete, and I needed a foundation in which I could integrate these amazing tools that I had from positive psychology, but a foundation that appreciates what it means to be alive, and
Mhm.
that's a pretty difficult experience just to
Mhm.
be here alive with other people in the world. So that's where I
Wow.
found existentialism, and
Oh,
happened
wow.
to be fortunate enough that the first masters in the world in existential coaching was offered here in London, at Emmy van Dersen School. Monica Hennaway created that with her, and then there I was studying existential coaching that I couldn't do anywhere else. So I stayed in London for a little while longer.
I mean, that's amazing though, because you found what you wanted right where you are. And oftentimes we don't feel like we can do that. I mean, what are the odds that as you're thinking about looking at existential coaching, that the first master's program would be
Mm.
right where you were at the time?
Oh, it was the same with positive psychology, right? I asked Professor Ilona Bonneville, who was just Ilona to me at the time,
Yeah.
and I asked her, "Hey, I've heard about this one master's in the world under Martin Seligman in Pennsylvania. Can you tell me more about it?" And she said, "There's another one now. It's here with me, and cohort 2 starts in September." I'm like, "Oh,
Sign me
well,
up.
I got to do
I
that
guess
then."
I don't have to go to Pennsylvania. I'll
Yeah,
just stay here.
exactly. But to your question, I think I would be a different person if I wasn't where I was. Right? There's this Milan
Oh,
Kundera
yeah.
talks about the 7 coincidences, I think, in the Unbearable Lightness of Being, which is like if I had stayed in Switzerland, for example, maybe I would have found something around audio engineering. Maybe I could have definitely made a career in music, I reckon. I could have made a lot of
Chocolatiering,
different
maybe?
lives. Yeah, yes, absolutely.
I mean, there's all kinds of things that
Yeah.
come up when I think of Switzerland.
I mean, there's so many unlived lives,
Hmm.
and that's also part of existential philosophy, right? It can be really uncomfortable to think about all the lives that I could have lived if I had made this one different decision. If I would have not gone to this one event, I would have not ended up here. And if I didn't have ended up here, then I wouldn't have done those things or met this person. The door wouldn't have been opened, and I would be a
Yeah.
completely different person, right?
Yeah,
So
and well, let me ask you a question about that,
Mhm.
because oftentimes we can hear people say, "Oh, if I had a just moved to Switzerland, life would have been so much better for me," right? The what ifs, and
Or
if I
maybe
would
much
have.
worse.
Correct, correct. But you know what I mean? When we hear these really strong
Yeah.
statements of, I would have been someone different and maybe that would have been a lot better than who I am today. How do you get your clients
Hmm.
comfortable with you made the decision that you made at the time
Yeah. So,
and you are where you are today?
yeah, great question, Nicole. What you're hearing there is a narrative, right? Whenever I hear
Mhm,
somebody say something like that, there's a narrative there. Oh, if then, my life would have been like this. There usually is a kind of a false certainty. Often, like a fantasy has built up.
mhm, mhm.
Sometimes either through regret or not. So challenging that, how do you know? Sometimes people are so sure that their life would have been better
So
when
much better.
actually
Yeah.
they have no way of knowing that. And I appreciate the existential philosophy for that, because it's built on the inevitable uncertainty around life, you know, because, yeah, if you would have stayed with this partner or that partner or this job a little longer, well, people have done that in the past and the company went bust, right? I had a friend who moved out of the events industry just before COVID hit, and at the time, really questioning whether that was the right decision.
Mhm,
And then all events collapsed, and he had already established himself in a new career that wasn't dependent on people going out. So, who knows? It's that story of was it that farmer in China? I've heard so many different stories about versions of that story, who loses a horse. It runs away, and people say, "Oh no, that's terrible." And you say, "We'll see." And then the son looks for the horse. The horse comes back with 3 other wild horses, and they're like, "Oh, that's great!" And he's, "We'll see." And then the wild horses break the son's leg, and everybody's like, "Oh, that's terrible!" And he's like, "We'll see." And then the war starts, and everybody gets drafted into the army and dies in wars, and the son stays home because he has a broken leg. And everybody says, "Oh, that's great!" And he says, "We'll see." So you never know what's going to happen. And I think that appreciation of, we just have no idea, we only have the life that we live now, we can never go back and make a different choice back in the day. We can make a different choice
correct.
now, but we need to own that that's our life right now, because
Mhm,
there's no point having any regret about things we've already done. We can only do
mhm.
things differently going forward. And there's the existentialists really encourage us to own our life and take responsibility for it, take ownership and choose, because we cannot not choose. Even if we choose not to choose, it's a choice.
It's a choice, and we all have a choice, and sometimes people think that they don't, but we
Yeah,
always
it's
have a choice.
safer, right?
Yes,
Because
it's
if I don't
safer
have a
with the
choice,
victim mode of, yeah, if I don't have a
yeah,
choice, then whatever happens, it's not my,
no
you know,
responsibility.
no responsibility. I don't have to
A-
own
And
that.
I get it. I really get
It's
it.
easier to do. It's that's an easier life,
Hmm. I used to be a person
maybe.
who was quite, quite passionate, let's say, about, oh,
Mhm,
we have to own our lives and make all the decisions and be as aware as possible, and take all the experiences with us and feel all the feelings, and like make the absolute best of our lives and go on adventures.
do
But
we?
actually, somebody who chooses to live their life relatively flat, relatively uneventful, I like, that's their decision. And if somebody wants to be as safe as possible, uh, and they consciously know that they're going to be missing out on a lot of experiences, but that's what they're consciously
Yeah,
choosing, then
yeah,
I want to respect that, especially as a coach. I want to be very careful that I'm very aware of what my philosophy of living is, and not
Versus,
impose
yes.
that on somebody else, and not like, because the kind of stereotypical life coach who like motivates you to go out there and
Go,
build the
go, go,
business
go,
and
go,
take
go.
the
Yes.
risks. Exactly. No risk, no success. Come on,
No
and just need a little
reward.
push. Yeah. But actually, look, my client needs to make their decision, and they need to live
Yeah.
with their decision. I'm out of their lives in a year's time, 6 months, 3 months, one session, whatever it is, you know.
And your life is going to keep on keeping on, and so is theirs. And when I'm talking to people, not my clients, but when I'm just talking to friends or something, or sometimes it may be my client, I'll take that back. When you're talking about you have your experiences, you have the way that you live your life with intention, not intention, however you're living your life, and the other person lives the way that they live. I always say, just do you, right? And I will meet you where you are, but you're living the life that you feel is right for you, and I'm living the life that I feel is right for me. And that's where it can sometimes get difficult for people, because people want potentially others to be like, why don't you just like live the way that I'm living? Like, my life is so easy, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, people have
For
to
you.
live the life that they feel correct is right for them. And my life may be really crazy for someone else's life, and I may not be able to live yours,
And
and
my
so I
way,
don't think that. Go
yeah, and
ahead,
my
your
way
way.
of my way of building a business, it might be completely different from your way of building a business. I've always talked about that like an hour ago with a supervision group there, but like I was always a bit jealous of people who can just read the book, take the blueprint, and just do it that way, follow the system, make it into a success. I'm like, that system just wouldn't work for me. Like, and also it's already difficult for me to follow systems, just
See,
because of the
you
way
know
that
who
I'm
you
wired.
are.
Exactly. So somebody who's just all the time out there talking to people, they're gonna create clients in a very different way than somebody who's techie and quite introvert and loves to sit at home and figure out systems.
Yes.
So I
Yeah,
know
not
coaches
me.
who's figured out
Yeah.
Google AdWords, and they click a button and they get leads, and then they stop it and they don't get leads anymore. That's a flourishing coaching business. And another coach on the other end of the spectrum, they're just out and about, they're talking to people, they're at events, they're like on social media, they're just like, they start chat messages on Instagram with what's up. And if they say what's up to enough people, then there's going to be conversations, and if you
At
have
some
enough
point.
conversations, they're going to be coaching conversations, and they're going to be paying clients.
Again, there's always many ways to get to an end, right?
Right.
I want to ask you this. I was listening to, I think it was a podcast that you were on. It may have been an NMS podcast. And you said something that I thought was very interesting for coaches. And while it's not super, super deep, I believe it's something that we may not think every single day that we're working with people. But you said, who you are is how you coach.
Yeah, I say that
I
often.
want you to talk. Yes, I want you to talk a little bit about that. Because
Yeah.
that was something that when I was listening to you, I was like, yes, 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 yes. Talk about that, Yannick. I
Yeah,
love
great.
that.
First of all, I can't take credit for that. I say it a lot. And at some point, I went to my very first coach trainer, Angela Joplin, and said,
Mhm.
"Hey, thank you so much for what you said in our first module." She said, "Who you are is how you coach." And I've been saying that often. And she's like, "Oh, that I can't take credit for that. That's actually..." So I think there's a chain there. I don't know where it originated. Um, the point here is that it's a point around authenticity,
Yeah.
essentially. Right? If something's ingrained in you as a character, if somebody's been a teacher for 45 years, and they're just not just as a profession, but as a way of being, that
Mhm.
imparting valuable knowledge, sharing experience, they're much more likely to have a mentoring element and a teaching element in their coaching, which
Mhm.
is okay. I fronted coaching that I thought wasn't coaching in my books in the beginning of my career, when I got into coaching. I'm like, no, coaches are facilitative, they're non-directive. That's what they do. And then you go out in the real world and you realize, half of the coaches give you advice. And when people in organizations say, coach me through that, what they mean is tell me how it's done. You know, and there's value in it, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
We need teachers at certain times in our lives. Sometimes we need mentors. Sometimes we need a coach, as in the non-directive, facilitative way
Correct.
of working with you.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need a consultant. Sometimes we need a parent. So I think a good practitioner will recognize what that client needs at that particular time within that session, sometimes even, right? And that we communicate that well enough in the beginning that our clients can give us informed consent whether to work with us or not on that basis. Here's what I do. Here's the playing field. Or, I'm the kind of cheerleading coach that gives you lots of advice. That's perfectly fine. Good for you. You provide amazing value in the world, but your clients need to know that that's your style, you
Yeah.
know? So who you are, how you coach means if you're that kind of person, so many people are doing coaching, and the really effective coaches, they're being coaches, right? So if you are a teacher and you get into coaching, chances are your coaching will have a teaching element. And some people transcend that. Some people transform, they change. They stop being a teacher and they start being a coach in my kind of framework, right?
Yeah.
They recognize the value of helping somebody find their own answers. And that's a wonderful transformation. And I see that in coach training all the time. But some people there are teachers and their coaching style will be a teaching style, and that's okay. So I love coaching for the breadth of what it can be. And yes, I appreciate the professional buddies for putting more of a frame around coaching. I think it's a good thing that that's happening, so we kind of know what we're talking about.
Right.
But I can't ever see it getting regulated to an extent where people who are not coaches under the ICF banner or in the ICF framework will not be allowed to call themselves coaches anymore. So be authentic. Most of the effectiveness of coaching, I mean, if we look at some of the research, half of what mediates the effectiveness of a coaching
Hmm.
engagement, that's the same in
Hmm.
therapy, is the relationship, right? Half of what we can
Very much so.
influence is the relationship. So the actual approach that we take, the actual school of thought, the actual questions that we ask, the interventions that we do, that's 15% of what we can influence, which is only 60. So it's about a quarter. So, the relationship that we build with someone, which is very much influenced by how we show up. And if we show up
Correct.
authentically, somebody feels they can trust us because they see us, because we're real with them.
Hmm.
Within that space of trust, that's where somebody can really develop. And that's why it's so important that we coach how we are.
I love that. I love that. Um, in the time that we have left, I'd love to hear more about the coaching lab. I know that you
Mhm.
were talking about a coaching lab that you do that coaches are able to join and watch you coach others, and they can learn from that. And there's labs after. I'd love for you to share that with our audience
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's something close to my heart. It happened. We're supposed to launch it as a live person-to-person event in first in January 2020, and
Hmm.
then we postponed it to March 2020, and then yeah, it's online now. the The idea of the coaching lab is that often when we asked coaches at the end of training events, what did you enjoy most? What did you find most valuable from however long
Hmm.
it was, hours,
Hmm.
days, weeks? They say, seeing somebody coach who's been doing it for a while, seeing the facilitator coach, looking at the demo, trying things out, being in the fishbowl, being in triads, doing the thing, connecting the theory to practice, seeing it play out. And I looked, on YouTube, and there's not I mean, now there's a lot more coaching demos out there, but
Yes.
most of them are weird. Well, not, weird, or maybe not very effective, or maybe very
I
strange
don't feel
style, or
they don't seem real. There's something about some of them that I've seen that just don't feel like
some
that
are
it's an
definitely staged.
actual coach. Yeah, it seems more
Yeah.
staged.
So what I wanted, and this is what we're doing every first Tuesday of the month now, is be a fly on the wall for a 45-minute session, like a full-on coaching session. I mean, 45
Yeah.
minutes is still relatively short for, some people, but you get a good chunk of coaching in, and you see somebody who's been practicing for years. And then afterwards, we have another 45 minutes where we debrief, ask questions. What was going through your mind as you were asking this question? What was it like to hold that silence? What other questions did you consider but didn't ask? What approach did you take, and how did that inform the way that you were being with this person? I felt that was a really awkward moment that didn't work at all. How did the client experience that?
I
And
love that.
sometimes the clients are quite critical, and sometimes the clients say, oh, actually what worked for me was that piece of advice and that leading question and that that motivational push. And I'm like, oh shit.
Right. You're like, the leading question wasn't supposed to be there. The motivation wasn't,
That
you
wasn't
start thinking
supposed to
about
be good.
that was
But
supposed to be the bad.
that was supposed to be the thing that we criticize, and the client loved it. So that's why it's a lab, right? We take a science attitude towards it. I don't
Yeah.
even ask my guests to do their thing, because it implies that they have a thing. It's really difficult to call things, oh, you now show me some existential coaching, now show me some positive psychology coaching. Now I say, just do a thing, and then we look at what just happened, and
Yeah.
we ask some
Show up who you
questions,
are.
and
Yeah.
you offer some reflections, and then afterwards we go into try it and we play around with some new stuff. Well, we had somebody in the lab, Sid, the other day, who was just radical in just sharing his experience. He called it resonance-based coaching, and it was just like, I'm having this image come up for me, or like I see this sentence right now, and then he would just share whatever is coming up for him,
Yeah.
just being completely present and in the moment, and it felt radical. And this whole time through, I'm like, this is not really working for the client, is it? But it really was. So for me, to be honest, at the beginning, it was an excuse for me to see people coach that I had been talking about coaching for ages, but never seen with a client. Right.
Right.
So we have Christian von Nürburg, for example, coming in
Nice.
June. Huge name,
Awesome.
and
Yeah.
we've been teaching together at the University of East London for some time. I really like the guy, but I'd never seen him coach for longer than 5 minutes. Right. So I'm so looking forward to seeing him coach somebody for 45 minutes and then have plenty of time to dig into his approach a bit.
Yeah.
So
I think that's amazing. Coaches out there, if you're interested in this, please go ahead. I believe it was put up on the screen as to how people can actually connect with you about the Coaches Lab. I think that's amazing that you offer that. And any time that you can get real life, real life opportunities to sit down and actually see pro coaches coaching clients, I think it's awesome. I always enjoy that when I get to go to a master class, or I get to go see some of the other master trainers that I've worked with, just being like, wow, I don't know if that's where I would have taken it. I was like, that's the question that came to mind, or whatever. So I think that's amazing. We're out of time, but I do want to ask you one last question.
Sure. I've got some time at the tail end. I had a client cancel, which is excellent.
What are some, I don't know if it's motivational or some insight that you would like to leave coaches today? What are some words that you'd like to leave your coaches today?
So I think what I would encourage them, this is something that comes up often and we kind of touched on a little bit, is what's the perception of the rules that you have around coaching? There's a lot of coaches that I have in supervision who really struggle with, but like, I'm bringing in I slip into consultancy mode. Well, do you like it? Yes, I love it. It feels really good. The client loves it. They feel really good. It really worked. It offered a lot of value. But there's this perception of, I'm not supposed to do that. So what's important is that existentialists challenge dogma, right? So we challenge the status quo, and you might arrive at the status quo again. But what I want to encourage coaches out there is to challenge what you have been told, to question it, to really make some time to think it through, to have the courage to be faced with some of the questions and the stuff that comes up as a result, and be really real with how's that working out, to experiment, maybe putting on a different role or a different hat, and to learn how to communicate what it is that you do and what it is that you don't do, because either you're not willing or you're not able to do that. Right? Where's the line to therapy? Well, nobody knows, right? In that moment, hopefully you're aware enough that you feel that you're out of your depth or nearing a line where you're going to be out of your depth, or you just don't want to do that work, So ask yourself these questions, go into supervision. Supervision is the best space where you can ask yourself these kind of questions and then form your own approach. It's inevitable that you're going to be integrating stuff and that you're going to create something that nobody else can do, because so much is based on who you are as a person. So that's unique about every coach out there is unique. So if you find a way to frame that and communicate it, even if it says, well, I don't know where the line is, I just know there is one, and you can trust me that when it comes up, I'm going to say something, then you can frame your space in this helping by talking universe. You give it a name, whatever name that will be, call it coaching or any form of coaching or something else,
Yeah.
and then your client can say, yes, I would love to work with you. And then it's all fantastically ethical. So that's what I would want to leave coaches with.
I love that. I love that challenge. We always got to remember coaching is a tool. We come with, as you also have said, many hats. And we have to be comfortable with the hats that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And so thank you so much for being here today. I really, really enjoyed hearing a little bit about existential coaching. I may have to go out and check out your book to get a little bit more.
It's plenty on my YouTube channel.
Okay, yes. Well, I'll go to your YouTube channel as well. But I really appreciate your time. I know that you're busy, and it was great just to have a lovely one-on-one with you. And I wish you the best day. We'll
Thank
talk
you so
soon,
much,
hopefully.
Nicole.
Okay.
Your curiosity is so refreshing. I can really feel it. It's such a good hallmark of a coach. So please stay curious. And thank you so much.
Thank you. You have a lovely day. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Make sure to follow us to catch more episodes of the Coaches Connect podcast.